At the dinner table, my entire family laughed when I was cut out of the will. No one flinched. No one defended me. But they had no idea that was the last time they'd ever see me as their safety net. What happened after? It wasn't revenge, it was something far more powerful. Stay with me because by the end of this story, you might just find the courage to walk away too. Claire adjusted the rearview mirror and took a deep breath. Her hands firm on the steering wheel of her silver sedan trembled just slightly as she turned off the ignition. The house in front of her was exactly as she remembered it, white painted siding ivy curling around the porch and the soft golden light pouring from the kitchen windows. It had once been a place of comfort. Tonight it felt more like a stage set for something else, something final. She sat for a moment longer, letting the sound of cicadas seep into the car. 38 years old, a successful brand strategist living in Boston, Claire had built a life defined by self-reliance. She was the daughter who had left, who had made it. But when the group family text came, Mom's, just a little dinner, nothing serious, she couldn't say no. Even after all the distance, even after the quiet disappointments and unspoken debts, she told herself it's still family. She rang the doorbell even though she still had a key. Her mother opened the door with her usual effortless warmth. Claire. Sweetheart, you look thinner. Are you eating? Margaret asked, brushing back Claire's hair like she was still 17. Robert stood by the kitchen island, a dish towel slung over one shoulder, carving pot roast. Still drive that same car, huh? He grunted his smile, not quite reaching his eyes. Brian and Luke were already at the table, laughing about something Claire didn't catch. Twins, 35, still living within a 20-mile radius of their childhood home. Brian wore a hoodie from their old high school football team. Luke had sunglasses propped in his hair despite the setting sun. Both turned toward her with that casual superiority that said, "You came back. Again." She smiled anyway. "It smells amazing in here." Garlic bread warmed in the oven. Red wine was already poured. Her old seat, the one with the squeaky leg, was waiting. It was almost comforting. Almost. They passed dishes, exchanged updates, made small talk. Claire spoke about a recent product launch her team had pulled off for a luxury skincare brand. Margaret offered a tight smile. Still working with all those influencers, she asked, with a hint of condescension, the kind that always managed to sound like a compliment. Dinner moved along too smoothly. Claire knew her family. When everyone was this polite, something was being buried under the tablecloth. It was Robert who broke the silence. "Claire, your mother and I, we wanted you to hear something from us directly." Claire set down her fork. "We finalized our will," Margaret said, her voice careful as if each word were resting on thin glass. "We didn't want there to be confusion later." Claire's stomach tightened. "Okay." Brian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Luke smirked that smug, boyish grin that had made him nearly untouchable growing up. To put it plainly, Robert continued, "We're leaving everything to the boys." Claire blinked. "I'm sorry." "What, the house?" Margaret said, folding her napkin with unnecessary precision. "The lake cabin, the savings, everything. Brian and Luke will be joint beneficiaries. It just makes the most sense." Claire looked around the table, searching for a sign that this was some sort of twisted joke. No one was laughing. "You're doing so well, Claire," her mother said, reaching for justification. "You have a steady job, a condo in the city. You don't need as much support." Claire's mouth went dry. "I helped pay off this house's second mortgage when Dad was in the hospital." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, and we're very grateful." "And Brian's tuition when he dropped out of state and tried community college," Claire added. Brian shrugged. "Nobody asked you to do that," Luke chuckled. "Yeah, you just liked playing the hero." Claire felt her chest tighten. "So this is my award for being responsible." "Claire," Margaret sighed, as if she were exhausted by the conversation you always make. "Everything about money." "No," Claire said quietly, her voice hardening. "I make everything about fairness." The room was suddenly still, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic outside. Claire stared at the people she had once called her whole world. Her chest burned not just from anger, but from betrayal that had taken years to ripen. She looked at her wine glass untouched. She didn't feel like drinking. She didn't feel like eating. She didn't feel like staying. "If that's your decision," she said, standing slowly, "then I have one of my own." Claire, her father, began, but she was already walking toward the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't yell. She simply left. Outside, the porch light flickered as she stepped into the cooling dusk. The stars were just beginning to emerge above the old oak tree in the yard. Claire looked up, let the night air sting her face, and walked to her car without looking back. Inside, the scent of pot roast and garlic bread lingered, but it no longer meant home. Claire sat on the edge of her bed, her apartment dim except for the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. The night outside buzzed faintly, but her world had gone still. Her phone lay in her hand, open to her banking app. Rows of automatic payments flashed across the screen, recurring transactions she'd barely thought about for years. Until now. Each one told a story, and every story came with a price. 10 years ago, her life had diverged, a fork in the road she hadn't seen coming. Claire had just been accepted into Columbia's graduate program with a full scholarship, her ticket to a new life, to living out the promise she had worked so hard for. But then the call came. Her father had collapsed on the front porch. Stroke. The hospital bills stacked up faster than anyone could anticipate. Her mother's voice on the other end of the line had been small cracking between pleas she didn't quite make. Claire didn't even think twice. She packed up her life-deferred Columbia and moved back to the town she thought she had outgrown. Just until things stabilize, she told herself. Just until they're okay again. But things never stabilized. They simply reshaped themselves around her. She took a local job in marketing at a mid-sized company, barely more than an assistant. Half her salary disappeared into her parents' mortgage. The rest went to groceries, Luke's textbooks, Brian's endless job applications that never seemed to land. One night, she went to bed with $42 in her account and woke to an overdraft charge because she had forgotten about the electric bill. But she kept going, because that's what good daughters do. In those early days, her mother would whisper, "We couldn't do this without you," into the phone late at night. Claire clung to that. Acknowledgement was rare in her family, and she savored it like water in a desert. Over time, the gratitude faded. What was once a miracle became routine. Brian needed rent again. Luke's car broke down again. Their calls came not with shame, but entitlement. "Hey, you've got that good job now. Right, Claire? I'll pay you back by next month, I swear. We're family." But the money never came back, and "we're family" began to sound less like love and more like leverage. She remembered vividly the summer she had saved for her first real trip Europe. Rome, Florence, Paris. A month to herself, to finally breathe. She had booked the flight, printed her itinerary, even started brushing up on her French. She never boarded that plane. Luke had changed majors for the third time. He called sobbing. Financial aid wouldn't cover the new classes. He'd be kicked out. "I'll figure it out," Claire told him. She hung up, canceled her flight, and drained her savings to pay his tuition. He never asked what she had given up. No one did. At the time, she truly believed, that being needed was the same as being loved. That if she gave enough, they would one day see her. Not just the girl who mailed checks or fixed problems, but Claire, their sister, their daughter, a woman with dreams and limits and a heart that bruised too. That day never came. Instead, the requests multiplied. Medical bills, insurance gaps, mortgage extensions, car down payments. Claire became the safety net that no one acknowledged until they needed to land. She worked weekends, skipped birthdays, turned down raises that required relocation because she couldn't move too far away. "We count on you," her mother had said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a chain. And still, Claire tried. Every Christmas, she arrived with gifts they hadn't earned and smiles she didn't feel. She covered for Brian's debt without telling him how much it hurt to do so. She wired money to Luke the day before her rent was due. Not once did they ask if she was okay. They assumed she was because she had always been the strong one, the capable one, the one who could carry the load without stumbling. Until tonight. Tonight they looked her in the eye and said she wasn't family enough to inherit anything. Her father hadn't even met her gaze. Her mother's words rang loud in her mind, "You're independent. You don't need help." As if that justified forgetting everything she had done. As if being strong meant being disposable. Claire rose from the bed and walked to her tiny kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water with shaky hands. She stared out the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. She thought of all the nights she sat here late working overtime just to cover someone else's mistake. She wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. What she felt was deeper, bone-tired grief. Not because she had lost her family, but because she had spent so long pretending she hadn't already lost them. She walked back to her phone. Her finger hovered over the app. Mortgage transfer, $100. Brian's bills, $250. Luke's car, $350. Every line a reminder of who she was expected to be. One by one, she canceled them all. Are you sure you want to end this recurring payment? Yes, recurring payment canceled. The silence that followed was profound. She expected guilt, panic. But what came was different, like exhaling after holding her breath for years. She placed her phone on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, eyes wide open in the dark. She wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in years, she wasn't drowning in someone else's need. She was standing on dry land. And that in itself was a beginning. Claire had always been methodical. It was a survival instinct she had refined over years of managing everything from work crises to family chaos. But this time, her meticulous nature was not in service of others. It was for herself. The morning after she canceled the recurring transfers, Claire opened her laptop and created a spreadsheet. One column listed the names Mom, Dad, Brian, Luke. Next to each, she wrote the amount of money she had sent over the past 12 months. By the time she reached the bottom of the page, the total hovered just above $38,000. Her cursor blinked beside the final sum like it was waiting for her to explain herself. She didn't need to. Not anymore. No one had the right to demand her penance for a loyalty that had never been returned. Her mistake had been confusing sacrifice with love, obedience with belonging. And she wasn't going to make that mistake again. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the blinking cursor. That afternoon, the first call came. Her mother's name flashed across the screen. Claire hesitated. Her thumb hovered, then tapped answer. Claire Margaret began, her voice sharp and clipped. I just checked the bank account. The mortgage payment didn't come through. Claire closed her eyes. Yes, I canceled it. A long pause. Then, what do you mean you canceled it? I'm done sending money. Claire said, her tone calm but unwavering. That part of my life is over. Margaret's breath caught. Over, Claire? What on earth are you talking about? We rely on that money. How are we supposed to pay the bills? You and Dad are adults, Claire said softly. Just like I was when I decided to help. But I wasn't obligated. I chose to. And now I'm choosing not to. There was silence on the line, brittle and dangerous. I can't believe this, Margaret hissed. After everything we've done for you, you're tearing this family apart. What happened to you? Claire's fingers clenched around her coffee mug. Her heart pounded, but she didn't waver. No, Mom. You tore this family apart the day you told me I didn't matter enough to be included in the will. That was your line in the sand. I'm just acknowledging it. That's not fair, her mother said, voice rising. We made a decision based on need, not love. Claire interrupted. Need. And now that you think I don't need anything, you decided I don't deserve anything either. But you were wrong about that. I did need something. Respect, recognition, and I got neither. You're making this about money again. No, Claire said. You made it about money. I just finally stopped playing along. The line went quiet again. When Margaret spoke, her voice was colder. You always did have a way of turning your back on people. Claire's breath caught for a moment, but then she let it out. That's not true. I turned toward you every time you called. I turned toward Brian when he couldn't make rent, toward Luke when he wanted a new car. I've been turning toward all of you my whole life, and none of you ever once turned toward me. She ended the call before the next accusation could land. Her hands trembled. Not with fear, but with the rush of clarity that comes when you finally tell the truth you've been swallowing for years. Later that evening, Brian texted, You seriously canceled Mom and Dad's payment? Wow, cold. Then Luke? What's your problem? You think you're better than all of us now? Claire didn't respond. She placed her phone face down on the table, a gesture that felt symbolic. Boundaries were forming, not in anger, but in survival. She stood by her living room window watching the early spring light fade across the skyline. It used to be that every time she refused her family, something even the smallest request guilt would rise like bile in her throat. But now standing here, she felt something else entirely. Relief. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence, with stillness, with the knowledge that for once, she hadn't surrendered a part of herself just to keep the peace. Her phone rang again. Her father this time. She let it go to voicemail. She knew what the message would say before it played disappointment masked as concern, disbelief masquerading as paternal love, maybe a line about how she was breaking her mother's heart. They always used guilt like a tool, like a leash, but the leash had snapped. The next day, Margaret left another voicemail. If you keep acting like this, don't expect to be welcome at Christmas. Claire laughed under her breath. She couldn't remember the last holiday that hadn't ended with her in tears. She sat down, pulled out an old journal, and wrote a single line across the page. Family only mattered when I was footing the bill. It was harsh, but it was true. And the truth had a gravity of its own. For years, Claire had played a role: dutiful daughter, dependable sister, emotional accountant. But the script no longer fit. She was rewriting it now, one painful page at a time. She didn't know what her family would say next, what they'd try. But for the first time, she didn't feel like it was her responsibility to fix it. She wasn't abandoning her family. She was walking away from the version of family that had always abandoned her. Claire was halfway through her Saturday morning coffee when her phone buzzed with a message from a high school friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, your mom posted something. Thought you should see it. Claire clicked the link. It led to a long Facebook post accompanied by a faded family photo, the kind people repost during holidays to feign closeness. Her mother's name sat above the caption in bold, unapologetic letters. We raised our daughter with love and gave her everything we could. But now in our old age, she has turned her back on us. She has stopped helping with the mortgage, the bills. She says we're not her problem anymore. All we ever wanted was to support our sons while they find their path. I'm heartbroken. Please pray for our family. Claire sat still, the coffee cooling in her hands. She read the post again. And again. Over 200 comments were already gathering beneath it, names she recognized and many she didn't. So sad. Some kids forget where they come from. Wow, after everything parents do, this is the thanks they get. Entitled generation. No respect for family. The more she read, the more surreal it became. A false narrative was forming, cementing her as the villain in a story she had spent a decade trying to hold together. It wasn't just the post. It was the performance, the way her mother carefully omitted the years of financial support, the late-night calls for help, the tuition payments, the mortgage bailouts. In one stroke of selective memory, Claire had been erased as a loyal daughter and recast as a selfish stranger. She closed the app and stared at the wall, her pulse hammering in her throat. The silence she had claimed so bravely had been weaponized against her. And now, without her voice in the conversation, only one version of the truth remained. Claire wasn't one for online drama. She preferred handling things quietly. But this wasn't a misunderstanding between friends. This was character assassination by the people who were supposed to protect her. She opened her laptop. At first, her fingers hovered. Her old instincts resurfaced. Don't stir the pot, don't make a scene, don't fight fire with fire. But then she remembered every time her phone rang with a desperate request. Every transfer. Every sacrifice she had absorbed in silence. This time, she would not be silent. She clicked new post. Her hands began to move with certainty. Since my mother has chosen to take our family matters public, I feel it's time I share the full story. I was never the daughter who turned her back. I was the daughter who turned toward them every time they asked for help. For the last 10 years, I've contributed over $150,000 to support my parents and brothers, covering their mortgage, medical expenses, car repairs, and college tuition. I've provided receipts for every transaction below, and I have kept every message asking for assistance. She attached screenshots, payment confirmations, dated transfers, messages from her brothers asking for just a little help again. She included a timeline of her major sacrifices, the scholarship she gave up, the canceled trip to Europe, the emergency savings she drained. Nothing was bitter in tone, just facts. She ended the post with a single paragraph that carried the weight of 10 years. Being a part of a family shouldn't mean you're required to carry the entire burden alone. I was never asked how I was doing, never offered support in return. And now that I've said no, I'm being painted as the enemy. I didn't abandon anyone. I simply stopped abandoning myself. And then she hit post. The response was not instant, but it came. At first, there was silence, and then the comments started trickling in. Some were defensive, loyal to the narrative her mother had shaped, but others' quiet private messages mostly told a different story. Claire, I had no idea. I'm sorry for judging. I remember when you helped Luke buy that car. Can't believe your mom left that part out. You're not selfish, you're strong. And it's okay to set boundaries. One aunt, her father's cousin, distant but always kind, messaged her directly. I wish more people had the courage to say what you said. You've done more for your family than anyone I know. Claire sat back in her chair, the adrenaline in her veins slowly ebbing. She hadn't posted to win a war. She had posted to reclaim her truth. Her phone vibrated again, this time with a call. She didn't even have to check the screen to know it was her mother. She let it ring. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And in that clarity, Claire finally saw the difference between silence and peace. One had kept her prisoner, the other had set her free. It had been a quiet week, almost eerily so. Claire found herself wondering if the storm had finally passed. The Facebook backlash had waned, and most of the private messages she received were supportive or apologetic. She hadn't spoken to her mother, her father, or either of her brothers since her post went live. For the first time in what felt like years, her apartment felt like a sanctuary. That illusion ended on a Friday night. She had stayed late at work finishing up a presentation. By the time she reached her building, the streets were mostly empty. The lobby was dark, except for the flicker of the security monitor behind the desk. She waved at the night porter, climbed the stairs to the fourth floor, her preferred way to clear her mind, and turned down the hallway toward her door. Something was off. Her key didn't fit. She tried again, jiggling it gently, then forcefully. The door wouldn't budge. Claire frowned and crouched to examine the handle. That's when she saw the glistening, foamy texture sealing the door frame from top to bottom. It looked like someone had sprayed industrial adhesive into every crack, every seam, solidifying her door shut. Her breath caught. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't petty. It was deliberate. A violation. Hands shaking, she pulled out her phone and opened the building's security app. She tapped into the hallway camera feed and scrolled back through the footage from earlier that evening. And there he was. Luke. Baseball cap pulled low, hoodie zipped up, but the posture, the stride, it was unmistakable. He looked straight at the camera at one point, as if daring it to record him. In his hand, a large industrial spray can. She paused the video, her brother's smug face frozen on screen. Claire's throat tightened, not with fear, but with fury. All the lines she had drawn, all the boundaries she had tried to hold, he had just stepped over them with a grin. She called the police. 2 officers arrived within 30 minutes. Claire met them downstairs, showed them the footage, walked them to her apartment door. One took notes, while the other took photos. Do you want to press charges? The officer asked. Claire stared at the foam that had hardened around her door like a plastered insult. She nodded. Yes, I do. Later that night, when she was finally let into her apartment after maintenance helped force the door open, her phone buzzed with a call. Her father. She answered not because she wanted to, but because she knew exactly what was coming. Claire Roberts said, his voice already tight with anger. What the hell is wrong with you? Luke just got a call from the police. Are you seriously pressing charges against your own brother? He vandalized my home, she said calmly. That's a crime, Dad. He didn't mean it that way. He was upset, emotional. Families fight. You don't bring the police into it. Claire's hand curled around the arm of her chair. Being upset doesn't give him the right to destroy my property. I warned all of you. I said I needed boundaries. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's harassment. You're blowing this way out of proportion. No, I'm holding him accountable, something you've never done. Her father's voice dropped heavy with disapproval. How much is it going to take to make this go away? Claire didn't hesitate. $3,000. That's what the damage and locksmith will cost. You're seriously extorting your own family? Claire let out a dry laugh. No. Dad, I'm sending a message. Actions have consequences. Luke isn't a child anymore. If he wants to play games like an adult, he can pay for them like one. Her father hung up. The next morning, $3,000 landed in her bank account. The transaction note read, "Hope you're proud of yourself." Claire stared at the message. She didn't feel pride. She didn't feel triumph. She felt the cold detachment of someone who had tried everything to hold on and had finally chosen to let go. Later that afternoon, another message came in, this time from a distant cousin. "Is it true what they're saying? That you called the cops on Luke over a misunderstanding? Your poor parents must be so ashamed." Claire didn't respond, but the messages kept coming. One from an old family friend, another from a childhood neighbor. They all echoed the same theme. How could she turn her back on family? How could she do this to them? But none of them asked what Luke had done to her. No one mentioned that she had supported her family financially for over a decade, that she had paid more in 1 year than most of her relatives earned in two, that she had sacrificed pieces of her independence, her peace, her health over and over again. To them, she was still just the angry daughter, the one who had finally said enough and was therefore the villain. That evening, Claire poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and stared out at the skyline. She had always known that choosing herself would come with a price. But what she hadn't realized was how liberating it would feel to pay it. In the world she had grown up in, love was currency, and forgiveness was expected even when the harm was intentional. But not anymore. She was rewriting the rules, and the first rule was this: being part of a family doesn't excuse you from being a decent human being. Claire didn't block them immediately. At first, she left the phone on silent and turned it over on her desk whenever it rang. She ignored texts, avoided voicemails. But even silence, when not chosen, can become its own form of noise. The messages came in waves, first from her father, then her mother, then her brothers. Some were pleading. Others were passive-aggressive. Luke sent her a photo of their childhood Christmas tree with the caption, "You really don't care anymore, huh?" Brian simply wrote, "We were family once." For years, these words would have unraveled her. They would have made her question, doubt, backtrack. But now, Claire only felt a strange detachment, like she was watching a movie she'd already seen too many times. She knew the script. She just didn't believe the story anymore. One morning, after a long night of tossing and turning, she opened her phone settings and blocked each of their numbers. She paused at the last one, her mother's, and hovered for just a moment, then tapped block contact. When it was done, she sat back and waited for the guilt. It didn't come. Instead, a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying began to dissolve. Her apartment, once full of the ghostly echoes of family demands, now felt still, truly beautifully still. The first week of silence felt like stepping into a new season after a long, brutal winter. No buzzing texts during meetings. No breathless calls at midnight over emergencies that always turned out to be avoidable. No last-minute bank transfers or apologies for not doing enough. She began to reclaim her space. She cleared out a drawer full of receipts and bills she had kept for them. She removed their photo from her bookshelf, not in anger, but with a quiet sense of closure. It wasn't a shrine anymore. It was just clutter. In the absence of noise, she started to hear herself again. Claire began her mornings differently. She rolled out a yoga mat she had owned for years, but rarely used, stretching in the golden spill of sunrise through her windows. At first, her body resisted tight hips, sore shoulders, but soon it began to yield, like it too had been waiting to be noticed. She started attending a local book club at the corner bookstore. It had been recommended by a neighbor she often saw in the elevator but had never spoken to. Now they shared tea poetry and long conversations about authors who understood what it meant to be both strong and vulnerable. Claire also started walking after dinner. No headphones, just the sound of her own footsteps on the pavement, the rhythm of her breathing, the faint laughter of children from nearby parks. The city, once a blur outside her windows, was becoming a place she inhabited, not just passed through. At first, she worried that something terrible would happen, that cutting her family off would bring chaos or escalation. But the opposite happened. They went quiet. Not just the phones, the guilt, the invisible leash that had tied her worth to their comfort, gone. She realized something she had never dared believe before. Peace was not something others granted her. It was something she could build for herself. On a rainy Thursday, she came home to find a note slipped under her door from her neighbor across the hall. A small smile tugged at her lips as she read it. "Claire, a few of us are getting together for wine and board games on Saturday. We'd love for you to come. No family drama required. Claire laughed out loud. She hadn't laughed like that in months, freely, suddenly, without apology. That Saturday, she brought a bottle of red and a chocolate tart from the bakery on her block. They played Scrabble, told stories about bad dates and worse bosses, and no one once asked her why she was single, why she didn't talk to her parents, or what went wrong with her family. No one tried to fix her. They just let her be. And for Claire, that was everything. By the third week, the silence no longer felt foreign. It felt earned, like something she had built herself brick by brick, day by day. A home not filled with noise or obligation, but with her own voice soft, steady, rising again. Claire had always dreamed of Florence, and at 24, she had bookmarked articles about Tuscany, pinned images of the Duomo, and practiced Italian phrases on her lunch breaks. It had been her trip, the one she promised herself she would take before turning 30. But instead, she had paid Luke's tuition. Years passed. The dream faded into a blur of obligations and missed chances. She stopped planning trips and started making payments. Florence became a symbol of what she had postponed, of who she might have been. Until now. 3 months after cutting off her family, Claire booked the ticket. No hesitation. No guilt. One round-trip flight to Italy. 2 weeks. Just her and the life she had put on hold. When she stepped off the plane, the air was different. Warmer, earthier. The smell of roasted coffee and blooming citrus wrapped around her like a welcome. The taxi ride from the airport was a blur of terracotta rooftops, ancient stone, and glimpses of a river that seemed to shimmer with memory. Claire stayed in a small guest house near Piazza della Signoria. The walls were aged and lovely, the windows draped in lace, and the morning light poured in like liquid honey. For the first time in years, she woke not to buzzing phones or urgent emails, but to birdsong and the slow hum of a city that moved at its own rhythm. She wandered the narrow streets with no agenda. She visited museums, stared at frescoes until her neck hurt, and allowed herself to be moved by beauty with no obligation to explain why. It was on her third morning, sitting at a cafe, tucked between a bookshop and a florist, that she met him. He approached slowly, holding a cappuccino and a sketchbook, his expression open but unintrusive. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "The sun's playing favorites with this table." Claire smiled. "By all means, fair shade for all." He sat down, placed his sketchbook beside his cup, and offered a hand. Alex, New York native, current Florentine addict. She shook it. Claire, Boston-born, first-timer. They talked like old acquaintances, about the architecture, the food, the rhythm of a city that didn't rush. Alex was an interior designer who had moved to Florence 2 years earlier to work on a historical restoration project and never really left. His voice was warm and easy, his laugh low and unforced. Not once did he ask about her family. He didn't prod, didn't try to decode her. He just listened when she spoke about a painting that had made her cry, when she described the gelato she tried at midnight, when she talked about walking alone and feeling enough. With Alex, there was no weight to perform, no unspoken checklist to pass. He didn't ask if she had kids or a husband, or why she had taken a solo trip at nearly 40. He didn't look at her with pity or confusion, just presence. They met again the next day, and the next. Sometimes they sat in quiet cafes and traded stories. Sometimes they walked along the Arno, stopping to admire the light or to listen to a street violinist. One afternoon, they ducked into a bookstore and spent an hour browsing titles in languages neither of them could fluently read. She watched him trace the covers like they were old friends. He asked her what she loved, not what she did. Not who needed her, but what lit her up. And for the first time, Claire had answers. She told him about her love for design, how she used to sketch room layouts as a child, how she'd always wanted to live near the sea, how she found peace in old bookstores and messy oil paintings and music that didn't rhyme. Alex smiled, leaning back in his chair. "You're a beautiful contradiction," he said, structured and soft, like Florence itself. That evening, they watched the sun set from a rooftop terrace. The light bathed the city in gold, softening the edges of the world. Claire sipped wine and let the silence settle between them, not awkward but full, like something sacred. She didn't know what Alex wanted from her, and for once she didn't need to know. It was enough that he saw her not as a problem to solve, not as a caregiver or a daughter or a sister, but as a woman with her own gravity. As the bells of the cathedral chimed in the distance, Claire felt something unlock. She had spent years contorting herself into shapes others needed giver, fixer, provider. And here, in a city older than any story her family had ever told about her, she was simply Claire. That night, as she closed the shutters of her room, she looked at herself in the mirror. No makeup, no performance, just the quiet, raw face of someone coming home to herself. She wasn't in love, not yet. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to be loved, not for her usefulness, not for her sacrifice, but simply for being. And that she realized was the beginning. Coming back didn't feel like going backward. When Claire landed at Logan International Airport, the city felt familiar but not constraining. She moved through it differently now, lighter, more aware of the space she took up, and no longer apologizing for it. Her 2 weeks in Italy had changed something elemental in her. She hadn't left Florence with a new love or a grand plan, but she had returned with something more essential, a quiet, rooted clarity about who she was and what she no longer owed anyone. On her first day back at work, Claire walked into her office carrying a small, terracotta pot filled with rosemary, an herb she'd picked up at a tiny market near the Ponte Vecchio. She placed it on her windowsill as a reminder of growth, of peace, of her. Within weeks, her focus and confidence translated into results. A campaign she led for a niche wellness brand exceeded all projections, going viral through word of mouth alone. Her team thrived under her leadership. She began mentoring 2 junior designers and took on a collaborative pitch for a tech client expanding into Europe. By mid-fall, her boss called her into the glass-walled corner office and offered her a promotion, creative director. It was the role she had dreamed of for years but never pursued because something or someone had always come first. This time, there were no hesitations. She accepted. Later that evening, she sat at her desk, the skyline glowing behind her, and allowed herself a quiet smile. She didn't call anyone, didn't text the news. The achievement didn't need to be performed to be real. It was hers. With the promotion came a bonus, and with the bonus came something even more symbolic, her own apartment. She found it in a sun-drenched building in Cambridge, a one-bedroom unit with hardwood floors, tall windows, and a view of the Charles River just a block away. The kitchen was small, but she could already see herself drinking coffee there barefoot and unhurried. There was a nook by the window just big enough for a reading chair and a stack of books. She signed the papers with steady hands and picked up the keys that weekend. It was the first place she had ever lived that was fully hers. Not shared, not borrowed, not a temporary compromise. No one else's name on the lease, no space held for obligation. The day she moved in, she unpacked slowly, deliberately. She put her favorite novels on the shelves in order of how much they had comforted her. She hung a framed photo of Florence above her bed, not of her and Alex, but of a narrow street filled with laundry and light. In the evening, she stood barefoot in the center of her living room, still surrounded by half-unopened boxes, and opened her old journal. Flipping past months of pain and transformation, she found a blank page and wrote, "I used to be a talking wallet. Now I am a whole person." She paused, let the words settle, then added beneath it, "A woman who gives by choice, not compulsion, who no longer equates worth with utility, who knows how to say no and why that matters." The next few weeks unfolded like the start of a different kind of life. Claire furnished the apartment slowly, no rush, no pressure to impress anyone. She bought a secondhand armchair and reupholstered it herself with burnt orange linen. She planted herbs in her kitchen windowsill. She made playlists filled with songs that had nothing to do with nostalgia, only present joy. She began spending Sundays walking the Esplanade, sometimes alone, sometimes with a friend she had reconnected with from college. She hosted a dinner for her book club in her new place, lighting candles and serving pasta with wine she'd carried back from Florence. No one asked her about her family. They talked about art, about identity, about new chapters, and aging gracefully. She belonged in those rooms not as a caretaker, not as someone's emotional reservoir, but as Claire, just Claire. Sometimes the memories return the old guilt, the voices that once shaped her decisions. But they no longer dictated her choices. They were shadows on a brighter wall. She still hadn't heard from her mother or her father. The calls had stopped, the messages too. It was as if once she had stopped being useful, they had simply chosen to forget her. But Claire no longer carried the need to be remembered by people who only saw her as a function. Instead, she was writing a new story. One afternoon, she walked into a local stationery shop and found a notebook bound in dark blue leather. She bought it without hesitation. That night, she opened it and wrote on the first page, "This is the beginning of the rest of me." She didn't know what would fill the next pages more travel, more love, more solitude, perhaps. But every line would be written freely, on her terms. Claire closed the notebook and turned off the light. The apartment, bathed in quiet, held her like a promise, soft, sturdy, and completely her own. The text came on a Tuesday morning. Claire was sitting at her desk in her new office, sipping her first cup of coffee and reviewing final designs for a client presentation when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Aunt Linda, her mother's cousin, one of the few relatives who hadn't taken sides outright during the fallout. Claire, I know you don't want to hear about your family, but your parents, they're struggling. Your mom's cleaning houses now. Your dad's working night shifts at a shipping warehouse. They look exhausted. Claire stared at the message for a long moment. Her fingers hovered over the screen, not typing, not deleting, just holding the weight of what those words represented. For so long, she had feared this moment, the inevitable consequence of her absence, the collapse of the scaffolding she had built beam by financial beam for over a decade. But now that it was here, all she felt was clarity. She didn't reply. It wasn't out of cruelty. It wasn't vengeance. It was something far less dramatic and far more resolute. It was the calm that comes when you finally believe that other people's choices are not your responsibility. She knew her mother had never held a job after marriage. Margaret had once described working class labor as what other women do, and now she was scrubbing toilets in strangers' homes. Robert, who once prided himself on his early retirement plan, was hauling packages past midnight to stay afloat. Claire took no pleasure in this reversal. She didn't want them to suffer, but she also didn't want to carry them anymore. She thought back to all those years, the countless wire transfers, the second jobs she took on to stay solvent, the canceled vacations, the broken relationships that couldn't survive the imbalance. She thought about every time she'd begged them to budget better, to stop depending on her, and every time they'd laughed it off or accused her of being dramatic. When I helped, Claire thought they never saw me as a person, just a solution, a wallet with a pulse. And now, for the first time, they had to see her not as their safety net, but as someone with boundaries, someone who had chosen to live. She heard through a friend that Brian had lost his job after missing too many shifts. Luke, despite his bravado and curated life online, hadn't gained more than a few hundred followers on his social media platforms. He still posted motivational quotes and product reviews no one read. There had been no apology from either of them, no moment of reckoning, just silence. But not the peace Claire had carved for herself. Their silence was the silence of avoidance, of pride wrapped in delusion. Another message came a few days later, this time from an old family friend. Claire, I know. Things are complicated, but your parents are in trouble. Couldn't you help just a little, even if anonymously? Claire read the message once, then turned off her phone. She wasn't hardened. Her heart hadn't turned to stone. But she was no longer the Claire who bent backwards to be considered good. She was no longer the daughter who thought that love had to be earned through depletion. She remembered something Alex had said to her in Florence. You can't heal in a house that's built on your own erasure. How true that had become. Her family wasn't crumbling because she left. It was crumbling because they had built their foundation on someone else's endurance, and when that person stepped away, the structure had nothing to hold it up. They had chosen dependence over change, expectation over gratitude. And now they were being met with consequence, not punishment, but reality. That evening, Claire sat by her window, journal in hand. The sky outside was heavy with the first signs of snow. She opened to a clean page and wrote, I was never meant to be their redemption arc. I was the warning they refused to listen to. She paused, then added, and now that I've walked away, they call it abandonment. But I call it truth. And peace. And finally, freedom. Outside, snow began to fall. Gentle, slow. Inside, she lit a candle, brewed a cup of tea, and wrapped herself in the stillness she had earned. The echoes of her family's collapse didn't reach her anymore. They might still call her cold, distant, unforgiving. But she no longer answered to their definitions. She had written her own. Snow had fallen lightly the night before, coating the city in a soft hush that made even the busiest streets feel sacred. Claire woke early on Christmas morning, not to the chaos of family calls or frantic preparations, but to quiet. Honest, undisturbed quiet. Her apartment was filled with the scent of cinnamon and baked apples. A small tree stood near the window, decorated with modest ornaments she had collected from local shops in her trip to Florence. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Claire moved through the morning with calm intention. She baked a pear tart, set out a tray of cheeses and wine, and lit candles around the room. No towering guest list, no obligation. Just a gathering of people who had come to know her for who she truly was. By early afternoon, the doorbell rang. Her book club friends arrived first, arms full of laughter and homemade cookies. Then came Naomi, a coworker, who had become like a sister during long project nights and office vent sessions. Then a neighbor from her building brought a bottle of mulled wine and an unexpected gift, a hand-knit scarf in warm amber tones. Finally, Aunt Daisy stepped through the door wrapped in her signature navy wool coat, a tin of butter biscuits in one hand, and a bottle of champagne in the other. Claire hugged her tightly. "You made it. I wouldn't miss it," Daisy said, smiling. Family's still family. They gathered in the living room, talking and laughing over mismatched plates and old jazz records Claire had found in a secondhand shop. There were no forced smiles, no tension hovering beneath the surface. Just light, just warmth. Claire looked around the room and felt something loosen in her chest. She didn't miss the noise of her childhood holidays, the obligation, the undercurrent of guilt. This was quieter, yes, but it was true. And truth, she had learned, was the most peaceful sound of all. Later in the evening, Alex arrived. He had flown in from Italy a few days earlier to visit family in New York, but insisted on seeing Claire before heading back. He brought with him a small package wrapped in craft paper, no tag, just a simple ribbon. "Open it later," he said with that familiar calm, "when you're alone." Claire nodded, her heart steady. As the evening wound down, guests began to trickle out, warm and satisfied. Aunt Daisy stayed a little longer, helping Claire wash dishes and refill tea. As she dried the last plate, she touched Claire's shoulder gently. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "You built this. All of it. Not from obligation, but from love." Claire smiled, a bit teary-eyed. "Thank you for seeing me." When everyone had gone, she turned off the music and walked over to the window. The snow outside glowed under street lamps. Her small tree sparkled beside her, its lights reflected in the glass. She reached for the gift Alex had brought and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a simple sketch charcoal on parchment. A Florence street scene. A tiny cafe tucked between buildings. Her table, her chair, and in the corner a figure with a book and a cup of coffee. Underneath it he had written, "You never had to perform to be seen." She smiled, holding the drawing to her chest for a moment, then walked over to her journal. She opened to a fresh page and wrote slowly, carefully. "I used to think love meant giving everything. Now I know it means not having to prove anything." Then just beneath that, she added, "Family isn't always who raises you. Sometimes it's who respects you. And if I had to lose one to find the other, then maybe, just maybe, I won." She closed the journal and looked around her apartment one last time before turning off the lights. No missed calls, no unpaid debts, no aching need to be needed, only peace. Not loud, not showy, but real.